Brain health research is exploding. We may not yet have complete understanding when it comes to Alzheimer's or dementia, but what we do know, well, it's what this podcast is all about. For those of you who just want to think more clearly, focus a little better, or remember a little more, then you need to listen to my guest today. Sarah Burden from Life Seasons is back, and we are discussing the research from a world-renowned neurologist, Dr. Dale Bredesden. He wrote the book Ending Alzheimer's, and Sarah and I are going to summarize the important information that you need to know. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Hi, glad to be back. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Well, I'm glad you're back too, because we got an important topic to talk about today, and that's cognitive health. You know, with Alzheimer's, dementia, this is becoming such a serious topic in our society because so many people are suffering with it. And then you got just the everyday person, including myself, that sometimes forget those names and words and all the stuff we should remember right off the bat, but we don't. So I wanted to bring you on today and talk about what things can we do, or how can we identify some of our own problems that is leading to cognitive behavior that we're suffering with in one way or another. So let's begin with the famous neurologist, Dr. Dale Bredesden. You know, I know your company has worked closely with him. There's his book right there, End of Alzheimer's. So I know you've read the book. I haven't had a chance to do it, but I've definitely followed a lot of his research that he's put out, at least he's posted. So tell me a little bit about him and who he's all about.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you again for letting us talk about this important topic. And you touched on something important in your intro, that we do have an aging population in the United States, right? The baby boomers now are dealing with this stuff, and we have more people than ever who are starting to experience some of these things. But this isn't an area that affects only seniors. We all care about how quickly our brains are processing information. And for younger people, even, we have guys working at the company who are in their 20s, guys and gals in their 20s who really want to maximize the speed that they're processing information so that they can be more productive at work. People who play a lot of video games, people who give presentations, right? All of us have different reasons that we might want, there's a neurohacking sort of trend that we might want to have an advantage cognitively. So this is something that affects people at all different stages of life, and not just the elderly, but there are things we can do. And that's the good news. I think that's the revolution that Dr. Bredesden has really started. Is for many years, we were told you have a finite amount of neural connections. When they start to degrade, that's it. You should have done better earlier in your life, right? And the good news from Dr. Bredesden is there are measurable results from making some specific changes. And we have seen, he has had published, evidence of over 100 patients who had a diagnosis, of Alzheimer's and dementia, who no longer have the diagnosis. That's the first time that it's ever happened in human history, right? So it's great news. The earlier we start to sort of address the risk factors, the better off we'll be. So yeah, Dr. Bredesden wrote The End of Alzheimer's. It is a fantastic book. He's a very engaging, fun writer, but a brilliant, neurologist. And so he keeps the densest science to a couple of chapters, and he gives you a big disclaimer. If you are not here for the deep science, just skip chapters 5 and 6. We'll get into the what to do about it afterwards. But it is a fantastic book for anybody whose family has memory issues, anybody who's starting to see those things in themselves and a loved one. And I think also just for us, years before we get to that point, so that we know what are the proactive steps we could take that do increase my processing speed, delete all the unnecessary cookies that are slowing down this operating system so that I can perform at my best.
So Sarah, Dr. Bredesden has identified risk factors for cognitive decline, so what are some of those most major risk factors that he's looking at right now?
Yes. So there are a number of categories. He identified, I think, 41 individual metrics that in a patient he would see, and the more they had, the higher their risk would be overall. And those all kind of fall into different buckets. So one is the category of inflammation, which we know is at the root of so many of our 21st century diseases, right? We hear this on your podcast all the time, inflammation, blood sugar issues. You may have heard, I've heard people have referred to Alzheimer's as diabetes of the brain. And it turns out
type 3.
Right, exactly. Type 3 diabetes, right, is that cognitive decline. And so absolutely, Dr. Bredesden has found that to be true as well, that blood sugar absolutely affects cognitive decline. And someone who has unregulated blood sugar for a longer period of their life has a greater risk factor over time for developing that problem. This next category, he calls the atrophic risk factor category, meaning a lack of certain building materials that the brain needs. And the way that Dr. Bredesden describes the issue in the book is that your brain sort of is sensing all the time, do I have enough materials that I need to keep all the branches of this this business open? Do I have plenty of resources coming in so I can keep all of these different branches and divisions open? And if at any point the brain is sensing, oh, there's too many of these threatening factors, too much inflammation, too much unregulated blood sugar, too much exposure to maybe heavy metals or toxins, then I might need to close down some of these branches to preserve the rest. Or if I'm not receiving enough certain factors, I may not be able to keep this whole business in operation. And so those trophic factors are things like D3, thyroid hormones, our sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone. So if we're missing some of those in adequate levels, that also is going to contribute potentially.
Those building blocks. And I think he also goes into why the diet and exercise is so important as part of those building blocks too, as well, which we can talk about later. But yeah, the building factors, blood sugar problems, inflammation. What's the next category that he's also looked at?
He calls the next category toxic. So exposure to things like molds, pesticides, heavy metals, some things that we've kind of heard for a long time, maybe exposure to some of those things in the environment. He has found that absolutely to be true. One thing that I found really interesting at Life Seasons, we were lucky enough to have a little seminar from Dr. Bredesden just for us. And he said in one of his patients, people would come in and they would do the different cognitive testing. They would test different levels in their blood. And he saw a remarkable decline in one patient. And it turned out she burned a lot of conventional scented candles in her home. And and that it was measurable. And the lead in the wick and the synthetic fragrance had a negative effect on her cognition.
Those are things we would never think about. Exactly.
Right?
Just the toxicity that we're surrounded by every day in our homes. It's amazing. And heavy metals, especially. I mean, I've been amazed since we do so many hair analysis here at the store. We see so many people high in aluminums and mercuries and leads. And you're right. It's in so many things, including candles, that we don't even think about. It's amazing.
And at natural stores, we see things with lead-free wicks, and it's not even on most people's radar. But it was so impactful to hear for me to hear Dr. Bredesden talk about that, because he wasn't coming from kind of like a groovy health food store, holistic, natural background. He's in a suit and tie. He's an MD. He went to Stanford, and he said this happened, and this turned out to be the cause, right? So really.
Amazing.
Really fascinating and scary. So that's another thing I want to throw out when I go to relatives' houses. So I see pinky candles. Get these out of here. So the next category is the vascular category. So the health of your whole, vascular system and circulation up to the brain, because you can have plenty of the building factors, right? You can have low levels of inflammation, but if oxygen and those nutrients can't get up to the brain and the waste metabolites can't be taken away, we're not going to have clear thinking. So the
circulation is everything. You got to have good circulation. That's right. Exactly.
Absolutely. And the fifth type is what he calls traumatic. And we've been talking more and more in our culture about, emotional trauma. This actually is talking about specifically physical trauma, like head injuries, because there is a huge increase of risk for future cognitive decline. We've seen it, unfortunately, in so many professional athletes, especially football players, where there's high impact, that with more stress and trauma, physically to the brain, we do find that we are at greater risk in the future for cognitive decline and some serious issues. And actually, a small team of us were on a call with Dr. Bredesden not too long ago, and he's a huge football fan. Actually, he loves pro football, and he was talking about it, and he was talking about the increased risk of the different conditions that the football players are dealing with. And he said, well, it makes total sense when you think about it. The brain believes that you are being attacked repeatedly in a war situation, right? And same thing for soldiers, right? Soldiers returning from battle, that the brain is saying, you are being repeatedly attacked. We have to go on the defensive. And so not only shutting down in a protective way, but lashing out, with rage and emotion. He said it makes absolute sense when you think about it from a sort of protective standpoint. It's really heartbreaking. So it's nice to know, there's a long way to go in terms of protecting people who are, in times of warfare or in professional sports. But it's nice to know that certain nutrients can provide some benefit. So I'm glad that they're here.
Yeah, it's definitely getting better, especially in our sports world. I know when my kids are grown up and we played soccer all the time. At certain ages now, even at younger ages, they don't even allow them to head the ball until a certain age. So we're seeing a lot of different sports now taking advantage and understanding the information that's out there when it comes to brain traumas and impacts. So it's good. We're getting there. You're right.
Getting there, moving in the right.
We're getting there. We are moving in the right direction. And then I know his last one has to do with genetics, right? That some of the genes that are he's being established out there.
So what's interesting is he actually doesn't categorize that as one of the buckets of risk. Really? He says, you can learn that status. It's important to learn, but that's not a death sentence.
Yeah.
And so that is, he doesn't consider it the same level of risk factor as these other things that are a little bit more in our power, which is really good, hopeful news, right?
It is.
That's a starting point to know, but you can have, two siblings with that same genetic status. One will develop and one won't. And it has to do with sort of some of these epigenetic factors, right?
Which makes sense.
So,
that makes sense. So we got these risk factors now. Let's what does he say we need to do about each of these risk factors? Let's go through them one at a time.
Sure.
So when it comes to inflammation, what things can we actually do to help reduce inflammation of the brain?
Yeah. And so this is kind of something that maybe as your listeners, your viewers are watching, one of these may have stood out because maybe they've had a conversation with a healthcare provider. Maybe, let's say in the case of inflammation, maybe I know I'm somebody who tends towards being hot, being red, people who are kind of chronically red, have swelling problems, maybe really painful knees. Maybe we deal with things like arthritis or gout, a lot of tendinitis, bursitis, things like that. When we have that swelling and inflammatory response in a number of places in the body, that could be a good hint that maybe inflammation is something that we are dealing with. And so the first thing we'd want to do is help lower inflammation in the body, or help the body have a healthy, because we wouldn't want to get rid of inflammation altogether. Inflammation is a critical part of how our body functions, but we might want to help bring that back into balance. So turmeric, famous herb right now, very well known, well loved. Turmeric is a fantastic ingredient for helping the body manage inflammation well. Omega-3 fish oil or algae oil is another great way for the body to help manage inflammation levels in a healthy way. And in his formula, Dr. Bredesden has also included ginger, boswellia, quercetin, tart cherry, and then protease enzymes to help kind of gobble up in the bloodstream all those undigested bits of protein that can be causing more inflammation.
And Sarah, what formula are you talking about?
And so this is, Dr. Bredesden has a formula called Recode Inflammatory. In a health food store, someone would be able to find something like Inflama-X from Life Seasons. Inflama-X is a great product. Yeah, and there are a lot of other good products from other companies that do help with inflammation. Inflama-X is the formula that Life Seasons has that would help deliver those ingredients.
And that's the ingredients you just were referring to. That's all in the Inflama-X. Yeah, it's a great product. A lot of people love that product to help modulate that inflammatory response. So it's definitely been a very successful product. What about, let's back up, because I know he came up with a formula called NeuroQ.
Yes.
Right. This is his primo product now for the brain. So what ingredients did he put in there to help address brain function?
That's a great question. And that is the foundational product for everybody. So Dr. Bredesden, through the course of his practice, over 35 years of studying people on their journey of cognitive decline and helping even back some patients out of the diagnosis of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's, found that these risk factors that were contributing to the brain making the decision to close down different branches, some of these risk factors had been at work for 20 years. And so his first thought was, we need to start getting people these nutrients to cover these main categories of risk way before they get to the point where they're really feeling it or their spouse is saying, I really can see a change in you, right? So NeuroQ is the formula that Dr. Bredesden developed exclusively with Life Seasons. We're so grateful to have this partnership. So NeuroQ is for everyone. NeuroQ is to start taking before you get to that point, before you think you have a problem, even if you don't have a family history, or especially if you have a family history, because it has ingredients that specifically nourish and support each of those individual categories of risk that Dr. Bredesden has identified. So giving some nourishment, some balancing, right? Providing some of those building factors, helping the body get rid of some of the waste products that could build up. So kind of a strategy for each of those categories of risk, all in the easy formula of NeuroQ.
All in one product, exactly. I've read the research on it. It's very amazing the ingredients he put together to really help address a lot of these risk factors. And so it is that product that I tell everybody, we all should be taking this on an everyday basis, because it is for both prevention and for people who's got issues already. So it's definitely a great foundational product to build on. But what if you are one of those other risk factors, let's say blood sugar? What are we doing for the person who's a blood sugar disruptor, whether it's diabetics, insulin resistance, or whatever it may be? What would you do for them?
Yeah, and that's a great point. So everyone can start with NeuroQ, and then if you're listening and you think, oh, I have been told my blood sugar is creeping up there. I have been told by my healthcare provider that my A1C is maybe creeping towards, a number that they don't like to see. Or maybe I haven't been told that, but I just know I've got a weakness for cookies and refined carbs, right? And that's always my downfall. If I know I have a sweet tooth, if I've been storing fat around the midsection, which is sort of a telltale sign of that insulin resistance. If I have some of those other cofactors, insulin resistance often goes along also with high cholesterol. My blood lipid levels don't look good. My blood pressure doesn't look good. Maybe I'm dealing with some fertility issues. Those are all evidence of some insulin resistance and disorders with maintaining my blood sugar. So if I'm that person, I may want to look at a formula like glucose stability from Life Seasons, a very well-researched, all-encompassing, very broad spectrum formula to help my body use my blood sugar better, help the blood sugar get into my cells to be burned as fuel instead of hanging out, causing more inflammation, causing more hunger signals, and getting stored as body fat. Not what I want to happen. I want it to drive right in and get burned up as fuel. And glucose stability has been proven to help with that.
It sure has. And I like to add another group of people that I see a lot of in my practice is the people who may be doing intermittent fasting or they're hypoglycemic.
Okay.
Who's the person that goes too long without eating and then feels like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde? That's a blood sugar problem too. It doesn't have to be diabetes or an insulin resistant case. It can just be someone who's having trouble managing sugar. And that's where glucose stability really steps in and shines, because it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're the low blood sugar or the high blood sugar. Glucose stability is just like the name. It stabilizes that sugar. And so it's an awesome product for doing that. So yeah, glucose stability would be a good one to start with. What about that blood pressure person? What are you using for someone who's trying to modulate or regulate their blood pressure better too as well?
Yeah. And so for your viewers and listeners who already are dealing with blood pressure issues, we all know you have to work with your healthcare provider if you are already taking a pharmaceutical for blood pressure, right? That's one where it's so carefully titrated. We wouldn't want people to get dizzy and stumble because there can be issues with that. So definitely have to work with a healthcare provider if you are already taking a pharmaceutical and want to introduce something natural. But the ideal customer is someone who knows that their blood pressure has been creeping up, but they haven't yet started taking a pharmaceutical, which of course has a whole host of, side effects that many people don't want, including erectile dysfunction. Harvard Medical published a study, and I think that there are so many men who are suffering who don't even know it's tied back to
it's related to blood pressure. That's right. They don't.
Yeah.
So the doctors are not telling them these things.
No, and so then now you have two prescriptions, right? Instead of pursuing another option for managing your blood pressure naturally. So Life Seasons makes a formula called BP Stability. It used to be called Hyper T for hypertension, but people thought it was for hyperactivity. You probably remember, you guys have carried it a long time.
I remember that, yes, I sure do. It was a confusing name.
Right. So I'm glad we're BP Stability. More customers are able to find it now. But it is actually based around an Ayurvedic formula that's been used for hundreds of years, which was called the Muktavati formula. And in the traditional Muktavati formula, which is really effective for helping bring blood pressure into a healthy range, the traditional blend contains pearl. And today, unfortunately, most practitioners don't support the use of pearl for internal use because they can be contaminated with heavy metal, mercury, and lead from the oceans. But pearl is primarily calcium. And so Life Seasons has included a small little dose of calcium in what we have recreated in the Muktavati formula, and then added in a really nice hefty dose of hawthorn herb. Hawthorn helps the heartbeats be more productive and helps with the whole vascular system. And so BP stability is one of the formulas that we get the most consumer feedback that they have gotten their numbers where they wanted them quickly.
Because it works. Exactly. So his other risk factor is blood flow or circulation.
Yes.
What are we doing for that group of people is to help them support circulation?
Yeah, at Life Seasons, we are lucky to work with a biochemist, and he talks about circulatory problems. We need to look at both the pump of the heart and also the pipes of the whole cardiovascular system. We need to look at the flow of the blood through the pipes, and then the pipes themselves with their structure. So Life Seasons has a formula called circularity, which helps with both aspects. It helps with that improved blood flow, improved circulation through the pipes of your blood vessels and arteries, but also the pipes themselves, because there are great sources of grapeseed extract, great sources of those antioxidants that are proven to help keep the blood vessels and arteries more supple and flexible, less brittle, so that we don't get breaking, and really improve your circulation all through the body.
Awesome. And then you got the last group, or another group, trauma. I know for people coming in with trauma, whether it's the sports or car wreck, whatever it may be, I use Stem Boost a lot for these clients. So I really love that product. I've been taking this for almost 2 years now on an everyday basis, and I really like the ingredients of Stem Boost. Could you give me a brief description of why it works so good for people?
And that is a great product to grab because your stem cells are your body's own personal customized repair crew. And the more of them you have, you can imagine being at a theme park like Disney World, where you never even see a garbage can overflowing because they have so many people on staff who are taking care of every issue immediately, so it never becomes a problem, right? The more crew you have on your stem cell team, the better managed your entire theme park of your body is going to be. So if you happen to need more help with neural health, or with maybe you have a torn rotator cuff, or maybe you have issues with your cardiovascular system, your stem cells are constantly patrolling in your bloodstream, listening for little radio signals. And you know what gets in the way of the radio signals for the stem cells to hear is chronic inflammation.
Yep, that's right.
So that's another reason that inflammation is difficult, is the root of so many diseases, because our own natural patrol system can't hear the signals of where to go when there's that buzz of constant chronic inflammation. So the stem cells are patrolling all throughout. And if you need help in your bones or in your brain or in your heart, your stem cells will go there. And stem cells are the only adult cells that can become other types of cells. They are what are called pluripotent. They have the ability to become many different types of cells. So the more you have, the better off you'll be. And Stem Booster has been proven to increase the number of stem cells circulating in your body. And even there was weaker evidence in the study that might even help them hear those signals better.
Yeah, that's amazing. I just love that product. I get a lot of feedback on it that it's helping people with that, chronic inflammation, but I know it's helping those building blocks and rebuilding that side for any type of trauma of those tissues. And like you
Absolutely.
said, it can change to the cells it needs. And that's what stem cells are so fascinating to me as far as the research goes.
They're incredible.
So basically, let's revisit the other group of building blocks, the BDNF factors. What can we do as far as, let's start with diet. What's one of the best diets for brain health?
A lot.
Dr. Bredesden.
Dr. Bredesden recommends a kind of keto-ish diet, right? Mainly plants, healthy fats, tons of healthy fats, healthy choices for meat in smaller quantities than maybe a lot of us are used to. So most of the plate being good, dark, rich plant material, a modest amount of high quality meat, maybe wild caught, cold water fish or grass fed meat, tons of good fat, maybe some berries, maybe some nuts, some good quality oils, very, very little refined sugar, if any, very, very little any refined carbohydrates. And so focusing on those good, rich vegetables, colorful sources, and really reducing sugar, especially. That was one of the things that he was most clear. You could measure a difference. He talked about one of his patients who had been under his care for a while, and they had really gotten this patient to a good place. And sometimes the patient would indulge and go get ice cream over the weekend. And when he'd come back in on Monday, his levels would be crummy. And Dr. Bredesden would say, you can see what's happening. And the guy was like, well, sometimes ice cream just feels worth it, and from Dr. Bredesden's perspective, like, no ice cream is worth it.
It's the worst thing in the world. No, that makes sense. So not necessarily a keto diet, but like you said, more towards that low carb style of eating. Is that a way to put it?
Right. Yeah. Kind of keto-ish, not very extreme, not hardcore necessarily, but primarily plants, lots of plants, good quality fatness, good quality protein in a smaller amount, and not a lot of overly sweet fruits, maybe just berries that are lower sugar, getting those different phytonutrients, but without the big hit of sugar, and really not a lot of bread and refined carbs.
That's right. Well, that type of diet's good for all of us, no matter what we're dealing with. You're right. If we can just lower the processed foods, the sugars, I mean, that would help reduce that inflammation itself by so much percent. I mean, it's crazy how well it works. Yeah.
Everything in your body starts to improve just because you're getting more fiber, right? Things are moving through your body faster. That means old hormones are moving out of your body faster. That means metabolic wastes are moving out of your body faster. Your brain's going to function better. Your skin will be clearer, right? Your hunger cues will get aligned to what your body actually requires. Everything gets better when your food gets better.
It sure does. And then you add exercise on top of that. I mean, that's such a big building block too for brain health, because it helps promote the circulation, move those nutrients from point A to point B. So it definitely, so many benefits in just walking, at least, moving around, moving the body, right?
Even just a little bit of walking, all of us have probably been in that situation. Maybe we're working from home or we've been really sedentary. We go out for a walk, and the brightened brain energy that we can feel, it's undeniable, the change that we feel just from a quick, brisk walk around the neighborhood. So absolutely that improvement for circulation up to the brain. The other thing is our skin is a pathway of waste elimination. And so when we can work up a really good sweat, that's a pathway that our body is using to get rid of some of those metabolic waste. If I never let my body do that, some garbage is building up, right? And it's having to tax my kidney, liver, bowel channel. So I can use that other pathway as well, so that I'm not building up those waste products that are going to eventually, affect my brain.
Exactly. Just anything that we can do to promote detoxification is always a good thing. In fact, you brought up an interesting fact before we started this podcast about Benadryl. Let's tell the listening audience about Benadryl, because I think it's important for people to hear this.
Yeah, no. And so today we're talking about, what are the things that you can do if you are interested in preserving your brain health? Because I know for me, I've watched family members develop, dementia and Alzheimer's and slip away. And that inability to know who your family is, there is nothing that's harder to watch, right? Nothing that's more heartbreaking. And I think none of us want to experience that. The fear and the isolation that comes from not knowing your family members right in front of you, it's heartbreaking. So we can all start with NeuroQ, right? As kind of delivering those key nutrients that address those main areas of risk that world-renowned neurologist, Dr. Dale Bredesden, has identified. Then if we're listening and we think, oh, I do have some issues with maybe, blood sugar. I know that I'm not having enough circulation because of these. I've got cold hands and feet. I get dizzy when I stand up. I've got some of these risk factors. I can add in some of those additional formulas for those things. The other thing we can take a look at, besides diet and exercise, now we're really cooking with gas. We've got a lot going here, a great protocol. But I also want to eliminate things that I might be taking that I have no idea could be a factor for cognitive decline. And so a lot of us buy over-the-counter allergy relief medications. Benadryl is one of the most widely sold drugs over the counter. And what most people don't know, I talk to people about this all the time. In 2015, the Journal of the American Medical Association published a study that said if somebody takes Benadryl, it's diphenhydramine is the drug name. If somebody takes diphenhydramine for 3 years or longer, they have a 54% increased risk of developing dementia. That was earth-shattering to me when I heard it. I thought that it was going to get pulled from the market, and it didn't.
It was still on the market. Yes.
It's still available.
That is crazy percentage though. And that was 2015 when that came out.
2015. You can Google it and find the the JAMA article right now. And
Wow.
so I think so many of us don't know that that over-the-counter allergy medication we might be taking. So you can look in your cabinet right now and see diphenhydramine. It's fen with a PHEN, diphenhydramine. It's in many, many over-the-counter allergy, sinus, stuffy kind of formulas that you can pick up at the pharmacy. You don't even have to talk to the pharmacist to get it. That's how benign it seems. It's just out on the shelves. So that's a big risk factor. That same drug, diphenhydramine, because we know Benadryl makes people sleepy, it gets used as a sleep medication. So in things like ZQuil or like Just Sleep or doze off type drugs that you can buy from the pharmacy, it's diphenhydramine as well. So I would invite anyone who is, taking care of their aging parents or who is at all concerned with their cognitive performance to take a look in your cabinet at those conventional solutions you might have and explore natural solutions. Life Seasons makes a formula called BreatheX. It's extremely effective for turning off allergy symptoms and providing relief. We also make a RestZ's formula. There are many great sleep choices, for promoting that deep, restful sleep. So make sure that these sort of benign seeming over-the-counter medications you might have in your cabinet aren't also contributing greatly to your risk of cognitive decline.
Yeah, which makes total sense because we know that there's good histamines, and too many of those good histamines or an overload of histamines is bad for us. Histamines is what keeps us awake, and that's why when we're doing an antihistamine to block those histamines to the brain, that's why we get tired, sleepy, groggy, whatever it might be. So I can understand the direct relationship on anything that messes with your histamine levels. It's going to affect your brain to some degree.
Definitely.
So there's a huge connection there. So it's very interesting. I didn't know there was actually a study done on that at 54% effective.
It's scary. It's terrifying to me. So that diphenhydramine belongs to a class of drugs that interrupt the action of acetylcholine in the brain. And we know acetylcholine is that essential neurotransmitter. So when that is inhibited, there are going to be long-term deleterious effects for the human brain. And it just has gotten glossed over because they're convenient drugs that a lot of people take. And sleep and allergies, nothing will make you miserable faster, right? If you can't sleep and if you can't stop sneezing, you feel desperate. So I think even a lot of folks who shop in health food stores and use natural remedies, when they haven't hit on the right one yet, it's so easy to go pick up something conventional because you're so desperate to get relief with either of those. But I was really encourage people to keep trying, go for formulas that use those high therapeutic doses so that they're more likely to get the results they're looking for and not have to go with something that may introduce a whole new set of risk factors.
No, that's a great point, Sarah. I really appreciate bringing that forward to help. People need to hear that. And there are alternatives out there. And I know, like you said, just because one doesn't work, there may be 2 or 3 other ones to try out there. So, but Life Season does a great job in all these categories. And I know we sort of covered a lot of products today. So we'll put a lot of this in our show notes so you can reference back to and be able to understand which one are you or which one do you need to be looking at. But Sarah, thanks so much for coming on the show today and giving us all this information. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sarah. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healthy Approach podcast. Be sure to subscribe if you like this podcast and help us spread the word by rating and sharing with your friends and family. If you'd like to learn more about NeuroQ or any other products we discuss, go to sunflowershop.com, that's shop with 2 P's and an E, or visit us at one of our 2 locations in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.